The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to go on the mat. The Cedar Valley's longest-running radio show devoted entirely to wrestling. Brought to you by Rolling Ford and the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum on 1650 The Fan.
Welcome to On the Mat. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, joined by the pride of Williams, Iowa, Andy Hamilton of TrackWrestling.com. You're in studio again. You must be okay with this gig. After a while, you said you were on the fence, mainly because of me, but now you're back, so...
I've tolerated you so far, Kyle.
Things are going okay, I guess. You're living in Cedar Falls. You're not too far from here. He's in studio. I'm excited about what's going to happen close to your house. Preseason Nationals at the Unidome. This is a great tournament. The Gable Museum gets a lot of traffic, and Track Wrestling is going to cover this in an unprecedented way. Every single mat is going to have a Track Wrestling camera on it so we can watch it live, and then it's going to be archived. When I think about that, I think about the 95 Worlds. That wasn't live, World Championships. We won it that year. Now we get kids wrestling live, and we have it all archived. It's unprecedented. Yeah,
absolutely. Technology's come a long way, hasn't it?
It has. I love it.
I mean, remember back to like 2000, 2001 when just getting the NCAA finals on television, same day coverage was a big deal?
It was a huge deal.
Yeah.
I mean, 2003, Eric Larkin had never seen his match. He won for Arizona State over Jared Lawrence, I think, that year. He hadn't seen it, and I went back, and it was a tape delay on ESPN2, and they only showed a highlight package. And it was a 10-8 match. It was one of the best matches I'd ever seen. It was a highlight, and now we get the access of real-time ESPN, not only for the finals, but from day one. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
What a great time for the sport.
And not just that, but you can sit at home and watch wrestling every weekend of the year now. Just about. I mean, I think we've got a stream or several streams, I should say, just about every weekend from, we'll have it from this weekend until, I don't even know when it stops. When it'll slow down a little bit when we get to April, but then you're right into the Fargo qualifying tournaments, the USA Wrestling regional tournaments. We'll have all of those. We'll have several hundred tournaments that we'll stream throughout the next year on Track Wrestling. So the world has changed a lot.
It has. It's a lot of fun. We only have you in here for a couple minutes. This is a special tribute show to the life and legacy of Bill Nelson, who was a three-time NCAA wrestling champion for the University of Northern Iowa, qualified for the 48 Olympic team, but did not get to compete because of an injury. So we're going to talk about his life and legacy. He had a great influence on the sport. I liked what Bill Zadek said last week or 2 weeks ago when we were in studio about the pioneers and respecting the people who came before us. And certainly Bill Nelson is among that group. We're going to have Bruce Nelson, his youngest son, on the show. John Bardis, who is in the Trump administration. He was a former wrestler for Bill Nelson. And we're going to have 1952 Olympic champion Bill Smith on the line with us. But as we get a chance to talk about more about what's going on at the USA Wrestling Preseason Nationals. You've done some great previews. Give us some highlights of what we can expect and just some things that will excite fans if they go to the Unidome this weekend.
Well, yeah, when I looked at the registration list yesterday, there were more than 4,000 names on that registration list. So you got grade school, middle school, high school, boys, girls. Just to give you a rundown of some of the top names that have been in this tournament in the past, you've got a Hodge Trophy winner like Alex Deringer. Kyvan Gadsden was in this tournament. Bo Nickel was in this tournament. Some recent world team members, guys and girls that were world medalists this summer. Gable Steveson, Mitch McKee, Ryan Deacon, Will Lewan, Emily Shilson. So there's some serious hammers that have come through this tournament and more on the way. I mean, I was looking at that registration list the other day. 5 of the top 32 prospects on Intermat's class of 2020, including Albert Ferrari from Texas, the number 2 overall prospect in the 2020 class. Fidel Mayora from Illinois, the number 11 overall prospect. Real Woods from Illinois, 2-time state champ, 2-time preseason nationals champ. He's registered. He's back. And then some guys, local guys that are committed to UNI. I got Kyle Biscaglia, Drew Bennett. They're part of that as well. But there's going to be some really good wrestling this weekend, and I'm really looking forward to it. Cadet World Team members. Ashton Sharp, he's on this team. Dylan Raguson also competed over at the Cadet World Championships in Athens, Greece. He's entered in this tournament, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
Should be a lot of fun. Thanks for taking a few minutes here to talk about preseason nationals. As far as the Gable Museum is concerned, tomorrow we start our memorabilia sale at the Gable Museum. Some great prices on some wrestling artifacts and some unique items, so stop by and see us. We're going to have that for the next 4 days, so Thursday through Sunday, and then a Dan Gable autograph signing on Sunday, October 29th at the Unidome from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Stop by and see the legend. So thanks for stopping in and joining us, Andy.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, you can catch the live stream. If you can't make it over to the Unidome, you can catch the live stream and all the matches live and on demand on Track Wrestling.
All right, we appreciate that. We are going to pay tribute to someone whose legacy laid the groundwork for our opportunity to have these great tournaments at the University of Northern Iowa. Bill Nelson passed away at the age of 90 on September 23rd of this year. Actually would have celebrated his 91st birthday yesterday. He was born October 24th, so we have an opportunity to pay tribute to someone who really made a difference in the sport of wrestling. We have his youngest son, Bruce, on the line with us. How are you, Bruce?
Hey, Kyle. Good to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on the show. Talking about Bill Nelson, here's a guy that was your dad, but larger than life in the sport of wrestling. Growing up with someone like that, what was it like being Bill Nelson's son and knowing that you had someone that had such an influence on the sport?
Well, it was really a lot of fun because you had kind of the who's who of wrestling, and they would come and do my dad's camp in the summer, and we would go to Lehigh University and do camps there in Michigan and Iowa. And it was really a lot of fun in Ohio as well. And you got to meet some quality coaches, kids that came up through those camps and later became national champions. And just the experience was very thrilling. Just because you got to meet such quality people, and the coaching was having him as a coach. He never put any pressure. You just kind of knew that you, at the end of the day, as long as you gave it your best, there was no regret, and that was pretty significant in both my career in wrestling, which wasn't as great as maybe what I wanted it to be, but my brother had a very good career in wrestling. He was probably a better wrestler than I was, but it was quite fun, I have to admit.
Well, and I want to talk about your dad's personality, and that here was a guy that initially he could come off a little gruff. I remember a time that he called the museum, and he called me back, and he just said, "Hey, what do you want, numbnuts?" And it was just kind of his personality. And then the next time, Bill Cole had died, and he was in tears. And so you just saw really a contrast of personalities, but he had a heart of gold. Did you see that through the course of his life, just that contrast in personalities?
My dad was the ultimate practical joker. And he got that from his mom, who was a practical joker as well. And there's times that he played jokes on the professors that he worked with and taught with, to the wrestlers. He had a rubber snake that he always had in his office. And I swear it was the most real rubber snake you ever wanted to see. It looked like the real thing. And he would pull that out of his desk drawer if somebody came and was talking to him, and he'd throw it on him. And, just those kind of practical jokes that he always, it was never a dull moment. But my dad was very strict. He disciplined well. I mean, he basically you knew where you stood. So, and he had the support, obviously, of my mom as well. So that went hand in hand. They were, he was really a very, relatively fun guy. When it came to wrestling, he just, it was all about technique. It was all about being in shape. It was all about, the discipline that you had to have, especially when it came to cutting weight. I mean, he, every year before the season started, he basically worked with the kids and said, listen, if you're going to get down to a certain weight, here's what you need to eat. Here's how you need to eat. Here's how you need to work out. And it was very methodical. But at the end of the day, he could have a lot of fun.
We are on the mat with Bruce Nelson, son of Bill Nelson. Bill passed away at the age of 90 on September 23rd, 2017. He was born October 24th, 1926, would have celebrated his 91st birthday yesterday. And when we think about the legacy of Bill Nelson, we think about the 3 NCAA championships, but also some of the near misses. In 1948, it was a tough year for him that he made the Olympic team, didn't get a chance to compete, and then got pulled off the mat from his athletic director and didn't get a chance to win that elusive 4th national championship in 1948. Did he articulate that to you, those near misses with history?
That's an interesting question. My dad never, he never brought it up. It was in his view, or in my interpretation of his view, that's just how things worked out, and there was nothing he could do to change it. And it created I have to say that it was, his dad was very angry about the situation, but at the end of the day, my dad never talked about it. It was just kind of a matter of fact, and this is what I did, and I did the best I could, and at the end of the day, that was it. It was he didn't dwell on it. In all the years growing up, it was just not something we ever discussed. It was just the luck of the draw, unfortunately.
Yeah. And talking about family, his brother died when Bill was in high school, and I remember your dad saying that his dad never got over that. Did he talk about his brother a lot?
Yeah, my dad said that his brother was definitely a better wrestler than him.
Huh.
And he said that literally to the dying day. He had a great love for his brother Dale. It was really something that I think motivated him too. If the truth be told, I think that was kind of a motivating thing for him during his wrestling career and Olympic career as well. But that was pretty traumatic. He died on his brother was killed in a train accident along the roads out there in Iowa, and it was I think it was his senior night, if I'm not mistaken. But I think that had a great effect on their family. But my dad's been very close to his one brother Harry, who passed away, and his brother Don, not to mention his sisters as well. His brother Don sends him all kinds of information about Iowa wrestling, whether it's Iowa, UNI, Iowa State, basically almost on a regular basis. He is probably his biggest fan.
We are on the mat with Bruce Nelson, son of UNI legend Bill Nelson, 3-time NCAA champion for the University of Northern Iowa, then Iowa State Teachers College, won championships in 47, 49, and 50, part of that 1950 NCAA championship team that is the only Division I national championship in Northern Iowa history. Went to the funeral, fantastic funeral, Bruce, and there were so many people there, full house. Did it surprise you that so many people came to that funeral to pay respects to someone who was so important to our sport?
That's kind of interesting because I go back to something my son mentioned when he was talking about his grandpa. He said that it's just amazing. He says he has these relationships, and my son plays college baseball, and he says, over the years, there's not a connection with the coach and the player. And he says that Grandpa always had these guys since he taught high school wrestling in Brighton, Colorado in the late 50s, early 60s, that he still had relationships to this day. And so it was not surprising. But, that's a testament to the individual that he was.
Beyond the NCAA championships and the legacy he had in the sport, how should we remember your dad?
Great question. I would say it would probably be about the dedication that he had to the young men that wrestled for him. It wasn't about always winning and losing, even though wrestling is so competitive. It was about the quality of the relationships that you had with those individuals when you promise their parents that I'm going to take care of them. And I would say that would probably be his greatest legacy, is the relationships that he forged and the help that he provided to these young men. When we were, real interesting story, real quick, when we were doing the memorial in Tucson, basically, it was really astonishing how many people, guys, that came up and said, your dad helped me get my first job. And nowadays, in the way college sports is, I just don't see that with some of the relationships out there. It's pretty cut and dry. You either win or lose, and if you don't win, then you're cut or you're done. And I think it was all about personal relationships and trying to do, even though they had finished their college career, even though they may never have been a conference champion or a national champion or an All-American, that didn't make any difference to my dad, because he fought for those kids even after they left the program. And I think that's a testament to him.
We have been talking with Bruce Nelson, youngest son of Bill Nelson. Bill passed away on September 23rd of this year. He would have been 91 yesterday. Three-time NCAA wrestling champion for the University of Northern Iowa, made the 48 Olympic team, did not get a chance to compete. Started the Iowa State chapter program for the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, and then was a head wrestling coach at Arizona from 1963 to 1981. Thank you, Bruce, for taking this time to share memories about your dad. We're going to have more with John Bardis and Bill Smith coming up next, but to talk to one of the family members really means a lot to us.
Kyle, can't thank you enough. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. That was Bruce Nelson. Up next, we have one of his former athletes, John Bardis, next on the mat.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When all you want is sports, all you need is 1650 The Fan.
We are back on the mat, 1650 The Fan. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. We are on our second segment for the special Bill Nelson tribute show. Bill Nelson, NCAA wrestling champion for the University of Northern Iowa, then known as Iowa State Teachers College. Won titles in 1947, 1949, and 1950. His senior year, he was part of that iconic Northern Iowa team that won the only Division I NCAA wrestling championship in the history of the school. Also the head wrestling coach at the University of Arizona from 1963 to 1981. We have one of his athletes on the line with us. John Bardis was a team leader for the United States Olympic team in 2008, also a team leader for the 2007 Greco-Roman World Championship team. Now he is the Assistant Secretary for Administration at the United States Department of Health and Human Services under President Trump. How are you today, John?
I'm great, Kyle. How are you?
Great to have you on the show. And when I list off all of those things, that you have so many things that you've accomplished in this world thus far, when I listen to you at the Bill Nelson funeral, I get the feeling that you would not have these credentials. We would not be talking to you right now without Bill Nelson. How accurate is that?
Oh, I think it's very accurate. Bill played an instrumental role in my life as a young athlete as well as just a young person, and really did so many extraordinary things to help me, and things that were unique and above and beyond what might consider traditionally the role of a coach. He just was a great human being, and so I have nothing but respect for Bill.
Why did you go to Arizona in the first place? Was it because of Bill, or did you like the weather? Well, how'd you end up out there?
Well, actually, I went to the University of Wisconsin as a freshman. I was recruited as a 42-pounder. And I think I only made weight a handful of times. I started growing, didn't realize it. I had been recruited out of high school to Arizona State by Bobby Douglas, and loved it. It was a Midwestern kid who left Chicago on a early April morning where it was sleeting outside. When I got to Arizona, it was 83 degrees and absolutely beautiful, and there were girls throwing frisbees on campus wearing shorts and bathing suits. I was completely shocked by that, impressed by that. I'm not sure what it was, but it was a really cool place. And so I had never gotten Arizona out of my mind, but I went to Wisconsin as a freshman, wrestled there. And my roommate was Lee Kemp. He was our 150-pounder. He finished second that year on a referee's decision to Chuck Yegla. Probably wrestled Lee 100 times, and we worked out all the time together. And I knew he was the better wrestler, and my thought was, well, I was going to be growing. I'd probably, be knocking heads with him, and gave me an opportunity to transfer. I did. I was tired. I'd been in a long weight cut that season. So I ended up going to Arizona. I didn't really anticipate that I would wrestle, but I walked in the wrestling room. I'd met Coach Nelson before as a high schooler, and one thing led to another, and I started wrestling for Bill after a redshirt year.
And you mentioned that Bill really had this great influence on you, and that you may not have gotten along with Bill during your time at Arizona. What was kind of the hang-up between you two initially?
Well, initially we got along great. What happened was my redshirt year, then my eligibility sophomore year, the year before, my redshirt year, I tried out for the 1976 Olympic team, got lucky enough to win the regional trials, went to the finals, and I petitioned into Greco, and I had a little bit of success in Greco in high school, and so I wrestled that. I made it to the round-robin finals for the trials, which were in Cleveland. I ended up finishing third, so making the camp and all that kind of thing was really a unique and remarkable experience. Bill coached me. He didn't know much about Greco, but he was there for me, and that's just the nature of Bill and the way he was. The next year I wrestled for him. We were lucky enough to win I won the conference championship, went to the nationals my sophomore year at 158 pounds. Oddly enough, Kemp went up weight class, and I went up too. He won the tournament that year at 158. And so what happened was the next year, I was wrestling most of the season up at 167 for duels, and cut down to 58 for tournaments. And Bill wanted me to cut to 58 for the dual meet with Arizona State, which was very important to him. And I didn't want to do it. I had some finals that week, midterms rather. And we got into a bit of a conflict about it. Somehow or another, made it into the school paper, and Bill put me off the team. He had every right to do it, particularly all that he had done for me. But it ended up being a point of contention for many years later, really over 20 years. And Bill, through a conversation he had with one of my teammates, about 20 years later, decided that the right thing to do was to bury the hatchet. And he called me. He even said to me, he said, I was in church, and the preacher said to forgive, and so I forgive. And that was sort of the new beginning for us. And what another example, and I've got 100 examples of, Bill being gracious and really always looking out for me and looking out for his kids. And once again, he was the one that was man enough to step up to the plate and restore our relationship.
Well,
so many good things came from that.
Maybe another example of how Bill Nelson was gracious in your life and how he would extend a helping hand to not only you but other teammates?
Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, look, anytime any of us had problems, either academically or financially, or we needed a place to stay, or family members of ours came into town to visit, Bill and Vi never once hesitated to open up their house, or if he could, he'd open up his wallet, or if you needed a car or a ride, he was just always there. And that's the way he was. He epitomized what great coaches are about, which in only a part of what they are about is the sport itself. It's really around being there for kids and character development and life lessons and, teaching people what relationship is about. And that's what Bill was like. I had so many occasions where, Bill really would step up to the plate and help us, help us as kids and so forth. And that, above all things, at that stage of his life, he was 50. He probably wasn't at the prime of his wrestling time. He was, he really had a couple of injuries and I think a couple of major knee surgeries, so he was less on the mat. But that didn't diminish his impact on us as athletes. His impact was based on his character.
We are on the mat with John Bardis. He is the Assistant Secretary for Administration at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. He was a competitor for Bill Nelson at the University of Arizona. We are celebrating the life and legacy of Bill Nelson, three-time NCAA wrestling champion for the University of Northern Iowa. Bill passed away on September 23rd, 2017, would have turned 91 years old yesterday on October 24th, 2017. Looking back on you guys repairing that relationship, one of the things I know you did was you actually brought Bill and Vi over to the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. How important was that to Bill to have that opportunity and for you as a team leader to actually have your former coach at the Olympic Games?
Well, for me, it was just a thrill. Judy and I had the privilege of bringing both Bob Campbell, who was a two-time NCAA All-American at University of Indiana, and my high school coach, who, speaking of Dale Anderson, wrestled Dale Anderson 3 or 4 times in college, when Dale was at Michigan State. I talk about how the world goes around and connected, particularly to the sport of wrestling. Bob and his wife, Sandy, and then Vi and Bill. Most of the time I was working, so when I had free moments or available dinners, we would get together, but I'm reminded of one particular story when Judy took Vi and Bill to the Forbidden City in what used to be Peking, but now Beijing. And a group of, at that point, Bill would have been 80 years old. A group of school children were coming by, and Judy obviously knew that Coach Nelson was a 1948 Olympian, and one who on the ship ride over to London in 48, he injured his back in an exhibition match and ended up ceding his competitive position to the alternate. The alternate, I believe, finished third. Would have been nice to see Bill reach his full potential there. It probably would have been a legitimate gold medal threat. But he hadn't been back to any Olympics since 1948. So, we're now talking, almost, we're right on the money. We're at 60 years. And we're 60 years since his last appearance at an Olympic Village or anything like that at all. And Judy, someone got wind that Bill was a former American or an American Olympian from 1948, and suddenly he was surrounded by 300 or 400 school children who all wanted his autograph and his photograph.
Oh, man.
Which Judy said was just such a beautiful thing, and just the joy and the pride that Bill, and in particular, but Bill and Vi felt by having that, those kids want to be with them and take photographs with them was just a special moment.
And I love that you had a relationship at the time and maybe even now where you could give Bill a hard time. And you mentioned that he had insanely long arms, maybe the longest ever given his proportions. Was it fun to be able to have some banter back and forth with Bill about just funny things and unique moments like that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, Bill was Bill loved it. He himself was a prankster, and like many pranksters, they love to prank, but they don't necessarily love being pranked.
That's true.
And so that gave me ample opportunity when we were in college to sort of test that theory. And we would always have fun playing jokes on each other. But Bill was the only man I knew, and I think some of this became even further, it got further in balance as he aged and got a little shorter. But he was the only man I've ever even heard of who could stand upright and hold on to both of his kneecaps with straight arms, which he could, which is a pretty amazing thing.
Wow.
He was, he must have had a whale of a tight waist, which is what I believe he rode with. But he was funny about it. We was just a joke with him. But every year we'd go out to the Phoenix Open, which my company sponsored, and Bill and Vi would be there in the winter, and we'd have dinner with him, and I would miss the opportunity to kid him about the length of his arms.
And with the relationship near the end there, and you did mention that you had a chance to repair that after 20 plus years, what was the frequency that you talked to Bill?
Probably once every quarter in there. The last year and a half, he wasn't feeling so well, so it was less. So it was probably more like once every 6 months. But we stayed in pretty routine contact, and whenever I was in town or in Arizona and he was there, we'd have dinner, or when I was with you at the National or the Dan Gable Museum Iowa High School Hall of Fame inductions, I believe that was 2 years ago, right around this month. He and I spent a good day together in Eagle Grove and his house, which he was getting ready to sell so he could move to Arizona. And it was great for me to see just how he was living and to get his perspective on things.
Now, just changing subjects a little bit, you were in healthcare for a long time, and you have a real passion for people and just the service industry. Someone with local ties, Norman Borlaug from Cresco, Iowa, I know that you were instrumental in, I think, getting a statue in Africa. Talk about your connection with healthcare and Norman Borlaug in particular.
Well, Norman Borlaug is, without a doubt, one of the greatest Americans who's ever lived. And his accomplishments and his success are really unparalleled. Norman Borlaug is one of only three Americans, he's one of only three human beings to receive the Nobel Prize for Peace, the White House Medal of Freedom, the Congressional Gold Medal. It was Martin Luther King and Elie Wiesel. Who are the other two? Martin Luther King, obviously, and Elie Wiesel, the same human rights activist and Nazi hunter. There are no other human beings that have ever lived that have received those three recognitions. Norman Borlaug, Dr. Borlaug is one of 100 Americans in Congressional Statuary Hall. Those Americans include George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. And Borlaug's story is just nothing short of stunning and amazing, having grown up in Cresco and being educated through the 12th grade in a one-room schoolhouse. And then going up to Minneapolis, he to go to college, he couldn't get into Minnesota or didn't get into Minnesota right away. And he got some education at junior college and got into Minnesota. But I remember a statement he made about how his father told him to fill his mind before he filled his stomach. And he surely did that. And he became one of the great agri-scientists the world has ever seen. There are people who believe that Norman Borlaug has saved as many as 2.5 billion lives with the green revolution that he started, particularly with dwarf rust-resistant wheat. And his painstaking, meticulous, and tedious work that he did in the Rockefeller Foundation-sponsored hybrid station that he started in 1944, started by Henry A. Wallace, former Vice President of the United States, and Nelson Rockefeller. It's just an amazing, amazing story of perseverance and courage, and ultimately a great reward for the human race.
And, of course, both wrestlers, you are both recognized by the National Wrestling Hall of Fame as outstanding Americans, so a great honor for both of you. We're talking with John Bardis, and we are talking about the life and legacy of Bill Nelson, who was a three-time NCAA wrestling champion for the University of Iowa. We have about a minute, John. Could you just sum up in a minute what Bill Nelson means to you?
Well, Bill Nelson was an enormous blessing in my life, and at a time in my life where I absolutely needed it. So God does remarkable things through the lives of other people, and Bill certainly was that gift to me. And in addition to that, Bill was a wonderful human being who loved his kids and was devoted entirely to the sport of wrestling, and was a faithful, committed husband. I don't think I've ever seen a more powerfully committed relationship than that of Bill and Vi Nelson, who were married for 70 years. And as I said at his funeral, I knew he was really at the end when the first time in their marriage in 70 years, Bill couldn't get up to make her breakfast because he felt that was his duty. And so Bill was a wonderful example of what I think are Midwestern values, wonderful example of an extraordinary wrestler who became an extraordinary coach, who was an extraordinary human being.
I think that sums it up well. Thank you for taking the time with us, John. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kyle.
All right, that was John Bardis. Up next, we have 1952 Olympic champion Bill Smith. We will talk more about the life and legacy of Bill Nelson next on The Mat.
Log on and listen online at 1650thefan.com, the online home of 1650 The Fan.
We are back on The Mat, 1650 The Fan. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum. We are concluding our tribute to the life and legacy of Bill Nelson. Bill Nelson, three-time NCAA wrestling champion for the University of Northern Iowa, won titles in 1947, 1949, and 1950, part of the 1950 NCAA championship team, the only Division I NCAA championship, team championship in Northern Iowa history. Our final guest can speak well on what transpired during those glory years of Northern Iowa wrestling. What a treat this is today, Scott. It doesn't get better than this. We have a two-time undefeated NCAA wrestling champion, won titles in 1949 and 1950. He won an Olympic gold medal in 1952 at the Helsinki Olympics. He's the oldest living Olympic wrestling champion in the United States, and he's the only Olympic wrestling champion in the history of Northern Iowa. The wrestling mat for Northern Iowa wrestling is named after this man, Bill Smith, on the line with us. How are you, Bill?
Okay, pretty pretentious name there.
Pretentious name? It's a great name, Bill Smith.
What?
Bill Smith's a great name.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay. Well, putting all on that, that's too easy.
I know, but hey, they just said we're going for the best, and we might as well put Bill Smith on there.
Thank you.
Hey, we want to talk about Bill Nelson, of course, but let's just put it in perspective. 1952, you won the Olympics in Helsinki. You qualified technically for the 1956 Olympics, but let's contrast this. You have the Living the Dream Medal Fund now, where you win an Olympic gold medal, you get $250,000. 1956, Bill, you couldn't even compete because you were a driver's ed teacher, and that was technically professional. Is it hard to believe the contrast between that, where you get kicked out of the Olympics because you're a driver's ed teacher, to now where they're making $250,000 to win a gold medal?
That's a big difference.
Big difference. Have you thought about that?
Oh, yeah, many times, because I always figured I kind of made the wrong choice. It wasn't like I just was by myself. I had other members on my family, and I always kind of was led to the fact that I should be staying home and take care of those people.
Probably a good choice, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it ended up being that way, but you never know.
Yep, you don't know. Hey, we want to talk about the life and legacy of Bill Nelson. You were teammates with Bill. You were both on the 1950 NCAA championship team. You guys are a contrast. You were long and lanky. He was short and stocky. What was that like for you guys growing up in that same era, growing up in the wrestling room together in college? And I'm assuming you guys competed against each other a lot in practice.
Well, definitely, and I always have said that that's kind of what made that team, really gel and make good wrestlers out of wrestlers that necessarily didn't have that background, to be good wrestlers. And, of course, Nelson was a good wrestler in high school, and it was legitimate for him to end up doing what he did. But the other guy was at 145, and heck, he had never even, I don't think he even went to the state meet, and he ended up being a 3-time collegiate champion.
Oh, Keith Young.
Yeah, Keith Young did it. And he was just amazing. But like we're trying to imply here, that those kind of guys were made, like myself and Keith Young, were made because of the real tough wrestling room and the people in the room. In many ways, the wrestlers, the good wrestlers, made good wrestlers out of other wrestlers that wouldn't necessarily have been good.
Now, as far as just the way that Bill Nelson conducted himself in practice, everything I hear is he was really a tough guy in practice and really had a really tough mentality. Did that rub off on you at all?
Not the way that you're speaking about with Nelson. It rubbed off in the sense that you had that competition going at you all the time, and you better, it's like wrestling with Cole, you know, you wrestle with him, you better try to save your life.
Yeah. And what kind of mentality did Bill Nelson have when he got out on the mat? Of course, I never got to see him compete. There's not much footage, but when he got out there, what was it like when he would compete live in wrestling?
Well, I think his main idea was to get after the guy and then take him down. And then once he takes him down, Bill Nelson had great control in the top position. And if he got on top of most people, they didn't get away.
And when
of course, in our time, you could get 2 minutes for a riding time, you know, and that's what he would try to do besides turn the guy over and get near fall points. But he was very, very tough in that sense.
Yeah. Did you have a good relationship with him through college? Were you guys friendly, or were you friends? How did that transpire?
Yes and no, because there's one thing, you know, being married like he was right off the bat as a freshman, and we were just single guys. You know, there wasn't much of a life outside that wrestling room in that sense, because he had his wife and family, and I was just a bachelor. So, in that sense, we were kind of different in you know, attitude toward what we were doing in life, basically.
We are on the mat with Bill Smith, 1952 Olympic champion. He is the only Olympic champion in the history of Northern Iowa in any sport. We are talking life and legacy of Bill Nelson. Bill Nelson, 3-time NCAA wrestling champion for the University of Northern Iowa, then Iowa State Teachers College. 1950 NCAA team champions. You and Bill and Keith Young were all NCAA champions on that team. When you had that team collected, you had the core group that I just mentioned. Did you guys know that you were in a position to win it at the West Gym, nonetheless, that year in 1950?
I think we had a pretty good idea when we had 5 guys in the final.
Well, that helps.
Yeah, that would help.
That always helps.
And, you know, the crowd behind you, I think, makes a big, big, big difference, because we were at other places where they had national championships, and we had a lot of support, but then, you know, you had to go get on a train and head to some place, and that wasn't many fans could do that. They had to work at a job, you know, and they wouldn't get to see it unless they had to be right there at Iowa Teachers. And when it was at Iowa Teachers, and people turned out, had great support.
Do you remember what the celebration was like after you guys won it in 1950?
You know, I don't, and I regret that, because it was really an outstanding moment in our lives, I think, anyway, in the sense that what we did was great and did it right in front of our own crowd. But I was not that kind of an excitable person. I wouldn't jump up 10 feet off the ground just because I won the NCAA championship. It was a shake hands, and off the mat.
Right. What kind of relationship did you and Bill have after college? Did you guys keep in touch over the years?
Yeah, we did. In fact, he stayed there in Cedar Falls after he graduated. And it was an interesting story that he called me up in 52 when I was getting ready to go to the 52 Olympic Games. And he said, go ahead and wrestle 160. He says, because I don't think I'm going to go, at 160. Well, he probably was weighing 200 pounds. So he was going to have to do a lot of cutting and a lot of working out. Now, there weren't many people around to work out with that. Once the college season was over, then they kind of drop things, and they don't stick around and work out.
All right, so if it came down to it, all right, you guys have a best of three between Bill Smith and Bill Nelson. Who's going to win the best of three?
Well, Bill would. I couldn't say that I would be in a situation where I win two of those matches out of the three. I had a likely chance of it in the way that I wrestled. But if I, slipped and got taken down or worse by Nelson, then I wouldn't have a chance to get away. He would keep me down. I wouldn't be able to get away from Nelson.
But Bill Nelson and Bill Cole and Gerald Lehman, when they made the 48 Olympic team, they were influences on you because you wanted to make an Olympic team yourself so you could go on a boat and have that experience. And then they ended up flying to Helsinki in 1952. But that had to be a big influence on you to see three guys come before you from Northern Iowa that made Olympic teams.
Oh, it definitely was. And once that happened with those three guys, I always thought I would probably stick around and try to make that 52 team and get on the boat, have a good boat ride, kid from Iowa. You didn't know about those kind of things.
Right. Now, closing out, just thinking about the legacy of Bill Nelson. When you think about Bill, especially in college, we continue to hear the framework of he was a fun guy to be around, practical joker. Did you see that side when he was in college, that he was a practical joker?
Yeah, actually, I did. I took a trip to Turkey that Bill was on, where we wrestled 3 dual meets in Turkey, and we were supposed to wrestle 3 meets in Iran, but we did so poorly that the Iranian said, he said, we won't let him go back home again, because we only won 1 match with the Turks in the first match, and then 1 in the second, and then we had a split with 4 matches each in the third one. But those Iranians didn't think we looked very good.
So did he pull any practical jokes on you?
Well, he was always doing that, but
was he?
I was used to that. I'd lived around that in high school, football, all that, go to college and same kind of razzing and things goes on, but you learn to take that. If you can't, well, it's pretty hard to stick around.
Yeah, for sure. Especially with someone like that, yeah. We're on the mat with Bill Smith, 1952 Olympic champion. He was a 2-time NCAA champion for the University of Iowa. We are talking life and legacy of Bill Nelson, who passed away on September 23rd of 2017. Bill would have turned 91 yesterday on October 24th, 2017. And as we kind of close out this segment talking more about Bill Nelson, what's going to be your number one memory when you think about Bill Nelson looking back? What strikes you about Bill Nelson? How should we remember his life?
Well, of course, wrestling was a big part of it, and coaching in some respect, of course, because he was at Arizona for a long time and did a good job, had several national champs of his own. His career would have been what I actually expected from him in a sense.
In what way? Just the legacy he has?
The fact that he would start out coaching in high school, I think, 1 year or 2 years, and then went on to college and coached younger wrestlers. And he probably felt like that he had a lot to offer with his style. And I think he did in one sense, but it was hard to, copy what he did when he was in the top position, basically, because he just controlled you completely.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, because he did something a lot of people don't realize that happened here. When he came to Northern Iowa that first year as a freshman, they went out and wrestled University of Illinois, and the returning champion was wrestling there at the time. And here, Bill Nelson, just a freshman, and he was wrestling the national collegiate champion. And he got pinned. He probably got pinned trying to do a roll, and that didn't work on that guy because he was already a collegiate champ himself. So what does he do? He's just about ready to quit wrestling, but Matt got on him, and got him in shape and said, no, next time you wrestle him, you'll beat him. Well, boy, gosh, he not only beat that returning collegiate champion, he pinned him.
Wow. Wow. I hadn't heard that story. That's fantastic.
Yeah, he pinned him. He'd come back and lost to him, the collegiate champ from Illinois, and then came back and pinned him.
All right.
In a match and duel me.
Hey, Bill, we appreciate you taking this time. What an honor. You have a great history. Everyone I talk to in the sport says that you were a huge influence on them and that you're a big part of why the sport is where it is right now. So what a great honor to have you on the program. You're the oldest living Olympic wrestling champion in the United States. That's a huge deal, and we appreciate you talking about Bill Nelson and his life.
Okay, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
All right, that was Bill Smith. It's been fun. We got a chance to talk with Bruce Nelson, his son, Bill Nelson's son, about life and legacy, talked to John Bardis, and then what a great honor to have the oldest living Olympic wrestling champion in the United States, the only Olympic champion at the University of Northern Iowa in the history of collegiate athletics. It's been a fun show talking about the life and legacy of one of wrestling's greats, Bill Nelson. I'm Kyle Klingman. You've been listening to On the Mat on 1650 The Fan.
You've been listening to On the Mat, the Cedar Valley's longest-running radio show devoted entirely to wrestling. Brought to you by Rolling Ford and the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum on 1650 The Fan.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.